Hello. This talk is The Journey Over the Intermediate Gap by Sara Packman. There will be potentially time for some Q&A afterwards, and so we look forward to hearing your talk.
Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for coming to my talk. It's called The Journey Over the Intermediate Gap. That will be clearer in a few minutes. But first, a little bit about me. That's my Twitter handle. You can feel free to tweet at me or follow me, but I don't tweet very much, so it won't affect your feed at all, but I'm happy to have conversations on there if you want to reach out to me. I went to Hackbright, which is a software engineering boot camp. Thank you. Yeah, there's a bunch of you in the audience. For women in San Francisco. I graduated about 3 years ago, and since then I've been working as a software engineer at Clover Health. It's a Medicare Advantage plan. You can find out more about us later. And I'm an all-purpose nerd. I love diving into any kind of topic and learning much more about it than I need to know. And one of my favorite topics to get into is myths and mythological structures. So in this talk, we're going to be using the hero's journey as a metaphor for the whole talk. And the hero's journey is a structure that underlies a lot of myths and stories that we know. Here's a very simplified version. Our hero starts off in his home world, or her home world. They get a little bit of basic training, and then they get a call to adventure. They step over the threshold and meet some mentors and allies, which help them along the way. They have trials and challenges, often culminating in a capstone challenge where they win a prize and return to their homeworld. It's often used as a metaphor for life, sometimes coming of age, any kind of journey of self-discovery. I'm going to use it as a metaphor for the budding technologist. A talk picks up the story right around the time when the hero is trying to get themselves out of the beginner stage and into the special world of learning and growing and becoming a fully autonomous technologist. So what do I mean about the intermediate gap? Around this time, beginners or newly not beginners are starting to look for materials to help themselves advance. But a lot of materials are either too easy or too hard. So I have an example here. Consider the Django Girls tutorial, which is an excellent resource. But from my perspective, which is the thing that I tried when I first graduated Hackbright, this is what the Django Girls tutorial teaches you. It teaches you how to install Python, do a little bit of terminal navigation, teaches you a little bit about Django. Here's some models and how you display the data, and they're like, great, go forth and build some stuff. And I kind of already learned how to do this. That was my experience at the boot camp. And I'm surrounded every day by web apps that I know are way more complicated than I know how to build. And so this didn't really help advance my knowledge at the time. As I was putting together this talk, I went back and looked at it, and I see that they have a what's next section that looks really great, but I didn't notice that before, or it wasn't there, so that's an improvement. And on the other side, things can be too hard. So this was a book that was passed around my office at the time, which has a lot of good tips, but I found it very difficult. And I'm going to show you why by telling you what my thought process was as I read this phrase. So the first thing it starts off as explaining is functions are first-class objects. Okay, I looked at the table of contents, I looked at the index, I looked throughout the book, but I could not find a definition of first-class objects anywhere. So already I'm a little confused. But then the next phrase, he says meaning. It's like, oh great, he's going to tell me this is why I read books. I will learn now. And then he says you can refer to them directly, and I was like, that's great. I know how to call functions. Is that the same thing? I don't really know what that means exactly. Assign them to variables? Well, it must be something different than calling an object and assigning the output to a variable, because otherwise he would have said that instead. Pass them as arguments to other functions, which is a thing I had no idea what to do. A function is a thing that does something. How do you pass a thing that's doing something to another thing? Made no sense to me. You can compare them in if statements, which also made no sense. What does that even mean? You have two things that can execute code, and then what does it mean to be able to compare those two things? Was one function better than the other? I have no idea. And then etc. What else can they do? And also, what is a first-class object? So this is a really great book. I've gone back to it now and I've found it useful, but at the time I didn't know some basic stuff that it assumed that I know, and it was very hard for me to follow. So everything kind of feels like this cartoon, which is one of my favorite cartoons. Um, there, there are a lot of steps between beginner things and advanced things, but they're not really documented anywhere, and you can't really figure out what they are. And why does this gap exist? I don't really know, but I've had some theories based on my experience and based on talking to some other people. One of them is that as no two people that are stepping over that beginner threshold are the same. Boot campers have one set of experiences, and within them there's a hugely variable amount of experience that they have. College grads have another one. Maybe a college grad would know exactly what a first class object is and have no problem with that. That was not me. And also, so you can't write a tutorial for somebody that might come at it from a million different angles. It would be hard to write that one. Also, at this point, the technologist has to start specializing, and there are so many different ways that you can go. You can be a web apps engineer like me, or you could be a data analyst, you can be a data engineer, you can work in IT, security. You can't write one tutorial that might cover all of those things. So this is very frustrating for the beginner to be, because there's no way to sort of get yourself out of this. But I learned that you can get through it. I know this because I held an open space last year on this particular topic, and I got a lot of really good feedback. Also, this is sort of reflective of my journey as I went through, went through this phase as a software engineer at Clover Health. I worked really hard, and I learned a bunch of things through both my experience and through the open space that I'm going to share with you today. So what do I learn? How did you go forward from here? The first step is often overlooked, but it bears stating. You have to actually step over the threshold. Heroes have a call to adventure, and they can choose to not do it, but they all do it, otherwise there would be no story. In the same way, technologists often feel like they're not ready to get out there and start coding, to start working and trying to do things. But you have to get there. That's the only way to learn where you're strong and where you can spend some time learning. And it's helpful to remember at this point that it's really hard, but the heroes are often not ready when they make that first step over the threshold. They have a lot of learning and growing to do. The second step is to find your mentors. Heroes typically have mentors and allies that are key to their success. They're very important teachers and helpers, but do not complete the journey for the hero. Similarly, you also need to find some people that you can ask for help, but you cannot expect them to actually do the work for you. Your mentors and allies are people that have more experience in a particular area than you, usually. They can help explain the different technology disciplines. Remember I said you have to start specializing? Often beginners don't even know what those specializations mean. So the best way to figure that out is to talk to people. They can help you get started on projects and suggest good projects to work on to help test out your skills. They can also answer questions, which is incredibly important. If you find yourself stuck as a beginner on something, it's much better just to go ask for help than to sit there and wallow. It's especially important because one of the biggest blockers for beginners' growth is the specialized vocabulary in different technology disciplines. Your mentor can give you an answer to those definitions much faster than you can Googling around. You can find mentors and allies through a number of different ways. If you're already working, the best source of mentors and allies are your coworkers, the people that sit right next to you. Many of them, I can easily say that without many of the support of my coworkers' support, I would not be here as a software engineer. I would not have ever come to PyCon, and I would not even be giving this talk. I relied on them extensively. You can also find mentors through alumni associations. I know the Hackbright one in particular is very strong, and the women there are always ready to help newer graduates along the way. There are a variety of community groups. PyLadies, Software and Data Carpentry are there to teach and to help spread knowledge of technology to a lot of people, so they are people ready and willing to work with you. And there's also domain-centered groups like Programming for Historians that know exactly the unique technological problems that you might want to be solving in a particular domain. There's also open source projects. If you get in, there's a lot of people there willing to review code and help, and you can develop relationships there that way help you go forward. The next thing is to learn to work collaboratively. Heroes have a team of people to help them along the way, and similarly, you need to learn how to work on a team as a technologist. Students and new technologists often work by themselves. It's a very lonely pursuit. But out in the world, you have to work on a team in order to build something that's strong and robust. But most importantly, learning to work with other people helps you grow. It exposes you to new techniques, much like Moana right here is learning how to sail from Maui just by watching him. That's the same way. You watch other people code, you read their code, and you get exposed to things that you wouldn't have thought of before. Code reviews are one of the best ways to do this, but a lot of the benefits of code reviews are also present during pair programming. Either way, it's important for you to see someone else's code so that you can see new techniques, and also get your code reviewed. This is part of some of my own code and someone explaining to me the benefits of breaking down the codes into easily testable pieces. The fourth is to rely on the work of others. Heroes always have some sort of tool that is left behind by an ancestor. Often it's a broken sword. In this scene, Moana is finding a bunch of boats that her ancestors left behind and they forgot about. These tools are key to the heroes completing their journey. Similarly, you've got some tools that people have left behind for you. This looks like Python's vibrant ecosystem. There's a lot of stuff in the standard library that can help you get over standard problems, like parsing a CSV. It's much easier just to call into that library than to actually worry about formatting, finding all the commas in the string, and breaking up the data along them. You can also rely on third-party libraries like requests. Requests can help you get and post from different services without worrying about the details of HTTP. These are just two examples. There are so many more in the standard library and on third-party packages, and talking to your mentors and allies is a great way to learn about more of them. Just a note on this one, when I was going through this, it felt like cheating to learn the library because I felt I needed to understand everything, understand how everything works, and I felt like I was shortcutting myself if I used the library. But that's a good instinct, but it's not really super helpful for someone who's just stepping over the threshold. The library can help you get past problems. There's no sense in sitting there struggling through a problem that has already been solved. It's much more useful to complete a project, and then when you feel you have a solid understanding of a system as a whole, you can go back and look at these libraries. Many of them are written in Python, so they're readable, and you can learn by reading the code, and maybe you can even improve it. The next step is to get to know your tooling. Heroes have several tools and tricks to help them on their journey. Coders also have an array of helpful tools that can be helpful, but they can also feel confusing if you haven't put in the time to learn them. And it does feel like a lot of time, and it does feel like a lot of time that isn't really along the lines of learning how to write Python, but it's so helpful. If you have a good, well-configured tool set, you'll get some fun stuff in your editor, like syntax highlighting, text completion, and text manipulation. Linters are really underrated because they can help correct your code and help you detect like when you've forgot to define a variable, or when you accidentally have one equal sign instead of two. And they can also clean up your code before you put it up for review so that your reviewers can focus on the structure of your code rather than the small stylistic points. Finally, learning how to use a debugger and a REPL is so helpful because it lets you step through your code line by line and seeing what's happening on every step of the execution. Brief note, I had a lot of conflicting advice on this when I was coming up, and it confused me, so I just want to break this down right now. There are two types of ways to edit code. One is an integrated development environment, an IDE. They come with a lot of this stuff kind of already built in, along with like syntax analysis and a lot of other useful tools. Some people swear by this because the IDE can actually teach them about the language as they go. Alternatively, you can just get a text editor. Some of them come with syntax highlighting already built in, but they're pretty bare bones. The good thing about this is you can focus on learning code and not learning your text editor. This is the path I chose, but either is good. It's really up to your personal style. I'm going so fast, so I'm trying to try and slow down. So the last thing here is to study. I know I was pretty down on studying before. I said you should get out there and practice and not worry about having to learn everything before you get out there. But once you have been practicing for a while and you have an idea of things that are confusing to you, it's useful to go back and look at books and courses that might be helpful. but choose wisely. You don't want to waste time on a course or a book that's not really working for you. Find a book that works for you, pick some that match your learning style. If you learn by doing, don't pick a book that has a lot of explanatory text because it will just go right over your head. Pick a book that has tutorials in it that can help you understand, walk you through a project and help you understand what's actually happening. It's okay to pick up books that seem too easy. This will force you to practice and review the stuff that you've already learned before. And it's good to go at your own pace, but be wary of going too slow. That can be an indication that the resource is too advanced for you and that you need to set it aside for a later time. What do I learn? A lot of this advice is super high level. Here's some concrete advice about books that might be good to pick up no matter where you're going. The first is version control. The most common version control I know about is Git. That's what I use every day, but there are other kinds. So with Git, it's good to know how to commit code in. It's good to know how to choose what code you commit. This is called staging in Git. And it's also important to know how to branch or fork and make a pull request into a master branch. Testing has been so helpful to me, and it's really important to learn how to test. It's important to know what makes a good test and when is it appropriate to write a test. It can also help you develop faster because it allows you to test little pieces of code in isolation to make sure that it works, rather than having to set up a whole environment just to check that one method works. Command line and shell navigation, this is how you're going to interact and with your computer and how you're going to run code. You need to know how to navigate through directories, make new ones, delete stuff, create new files, read the files, use cat, see the permissions on different files because otherwise you'll waste hours trying to figure out why you can't edit anything, and you need to know how to get rid of things. Finally, learning how to manage your environment is super important. I spent so much time on trying to figure out why things were going wrong when it was something messed up in my environment. It's really important to know how to create a new one, see what's in your environment, add stuff to it, and then destroy it all and rebuild it when it just gets completely messed up. So I'm almost done. I just have a few last things to say. My last slide is a summary of what we talked about. Remember to actually get out there and start practicing and start working. Find some mentors and allies to help you along the way. Work collaboratively so you can build bigger and better stuff and learn from those around you. Make use of libraries so that you don't get stuck solving a problem that's already been solved. Spend the time to learn your tools and set them up the way you like them. And study things that are confusing to you, but don't waste time on resources that aren't working to you. My second last slide is a theme that emerged as I was sort of putting this together, and it's that incremental progress is really important. The road to mastery here is very long, and there's a lot to learn, no matter which direction you go. It will feel like you have to learn everything all at once, but don't do this. Human brains can't absorb that much information all at once. Take things one step at a time, and remember to practice what you have learned before, to make sure your foundations are strong before getting on to something else. And my last slide is a warning and a little bit of a pep talk. This is really hard. The hero has a capstone challenge, and often this is called the abyss. You're gonna face giant problems. You're gonna face giant, mean, scary lava monsters. And it's gonna be really difficult. But you will get through it. In this scene, Moana has already figured out the answer. She already knows how to get her prize, and she will succeed. I hope that's not a spoiler. And I'm here to tell you that with practice, perseverance, and patience, you will also get through it. Thank you very much. I'm from Clover. We're hiring, so come say hi at the job fair tomorrow, and that's my talk. Thank you for attending.
Sara, thank you. That was a wonderful talk filled with some great gems.
Thank you.
We have a few moments for Q&A. We ask that you keep your questions short and direct to the speaker. And if you have longer questions or comments, that you please wait until after the talk to discuss them with Sara. If anybody has any questions, please form a line right here at the microphone.
Hey, Sarah, thanks so much for the great talk. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
In one of your slides, you gave a list of some general CS things like version control and testing and so forth. I was wondering if you could also share with us some Python concepts that you found to be more intermediate level. I understand people will have different opinions about this, but would love to hear from your experience what Python-specific roadblocks you may have come across.
Yeah, so I think I have to think about it for a second, but I think the question was about Python-specific roadblocks or things that were really useful. I think kind of understanding more about Python objects as objects and classes that can be edited and things that you can do stuff and objects that you can do stuff with was really important for me. Also, like the whole first class object thing and understanding that functions are also objects just like all the other objects and you can do the same kinds of stuff with that. That was also pretty key. And then learning how to use libraries was actually one of the biggest ones because I was the person that spent a lot of time trying to like parse the CSV by finding the commas when I could have just like plugged it into CSV. So I think getting out there and building will be much more useful than like deep diving on Python specifics. You'll learn the specifics as you build stuff. Thank you.
Oh,
go ahead.
Sorry. Are you aware of any like online resources where you can get mentoring kind of relationships? Like, is there a place on the internet I can like push a big like piece of code to, and then someone will review it for me?
That's a really good question, and the good news is that some are coming up. The bad news is none of them really have a lot of sway that I know about. I know that Stack Overflow recently introduced a code review feature that people could use. I also know that there's like a lot of interview prep sites like exorcism.io where you could design an algorithm to an interview question and then someone will like critique your algorithm, but that's not quite the same as code review because interview questions are their own special breed of problem. There's not one that I know about just yet, although I know some people have had an idea for building just such a site. So maybe if you follow me on Twitter, I'll tweet about it when it's up and running. But yes, I agree, we need those things. Thank you for your question.
Thank you for the talk. I was wondering for books to read or resources, if there was any that you found really helpful for your journey and any that you'd like to share.
Yes. So I don't know if you noticed, but all of those are links, and I will be sharing these slides out on Twitter afterwards. So feel free to look at them and see. These are links to my favorite tutorials on each of these topics. There are lots of them though, so you're going to have to find the one that works for you. The version control one is a link to the Atlassian tutorial, which is good for staging, committing, branching, pull requests, all the things that I talked about. The testing one links to test-driven development in Python, which is Obey the Testing Goat. Command line and shell navigation links to the appendix and learn Python the hard way because that has a lot of really good stuff in it for navigating the terminal. And PyEnv and Conda just links to the documentation for PyEnv and Conda. There's not like tutorials about it. It's more about you should learn to use these things by building it yourself, by building your own projects. But yeah.
My question is, how do you know what to learn next? Like, is you hit a block somewhere where you're like, oh, okay, I know more than the people around me, but I know I don't know that much. And I want to improve, but I don't know where to start or even where to go.
Yeah.
So how do you get over that hump?
Yeah, so first of all, if you look around and you say, I know a lot more than the people around me, but I don't know that much, like, just be aware imposter syndrome is a thing, and maybe that's your imposter syndrome talking. But who do I pick what to learn more? It really depends a lot on the kinds of things you're curious about. Like, for me right now, I'm starting to feel pretty solid in writing web apps in Python, so I'm starting to try and learn other stuff. And like, I'm for some reason drawn to like learning a more low-level language and understanding how the computer actually works, even though that's not something that I use in my day-to-day life. So that's just been a thing I'm curious about, and that's what I'm gonna try to find time to learn about. Yeah, I think just staying curious and observant to stuff that sort of piques your interest. I don't have any good answer because there are so many ways that could go. build something that you're not familiar with, like get hardware if you don't know hardware, like just find something you've never learned before and be a beginner at that.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, the question I had was regarding, you had a lot of great examples like communities you can rely on for sharing knowledge and learning from.
Yeah.
I was wondering if there's like any Slack groups or like more real-time
Yeah.
communication platforms that you've used and you found really helpful.
Well, a lot of the Slack groups that I use and real-time communication stuff that I use is based off of these groups. Like I'm in the PyLady Slack and in the Hackbright Slack.
Cool.
I'm sure a lot of other groups have Slack channels. I don't have time to wander around and look at all the Slacks, but like there's a lot of them that you can join. I also tend to be focused on women-centered groups just because it's important to me to bring more women into technology, so that's where I go. But yeah, there's a lot. I don't know any off the top of my head, but keep your ears open. And I think SF Python has a Slack, for example, which is a more general user group. So
Cool.
yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
So this will be quick. One of the previous questions was about how to know where to look at next. I would like to just say that two things that you can do to sort of keep your interest peaked on what else is going on is listening to podcasts. There are a couple good podcasts on Python. Python Bytes has news things that are coming around, and Talk Python to Me. There are a couple others. And then looking for mailing lists. There are two that I'm subscribed to, but I can't think of what they're called off the top of my head. But you just see things come in, like new projects that are going on or news that's happening, and you'll see something that piques your interest, like, oh, I have no idea anything about that. And, you know, when you're getting bored and not sure what to look at next, just stuff flying at you will kind of give you an opportunity to look at new things.
Those are great suggestions. Thank you.
All right, if there are no further questions, let's give Sarah another round of applause.